The greatest treasure on Earth was never hidden behind steel walls. It sat quietly on a corner where anyone could walk inside without asking permission. At precisely 8:17 on a cool October morning, the people of Maple Creek barely noticed the streak of silver light crossing the pale blue sky. A retired mail carrier paused while watering chrysanthemums on his front porch. Two teenagers looked up from their bicycles before continuing toward school. Somewhere downtown, the bell above a bakery door chimed as fresh cinnamon rolls filled the street with warmth. Life continued exactly as it always had. None of them realized an interstellar diplomatic vessel had just entered low atmospheric hover several thousand feet above their sleepy town. Ambassador Velara stood motionless inside the observation chamber, her hands folded behind her elegant silver ceremonial coat. Soft bands of golden light drifted across the transparent display surrounding her, translating millions of data points collected every second. Her civilization had explored hundreds of worlds, negotiated peace among stellar empires, and archived enough knowledge to outlive dying suns. Yet Earth remained one of the youngest members of the Galactic Assembly, mysterious not because of superior technology, but because its cultural development repeatedly contradicted accepted models of civilization. "Surface scan complete," announced the ship's artificial intelligence in its calm, harmonic voice. Population, 11,412. Military installations, none detected within 52 miles. Strategic research laboratories, none. Government command facilities, none. Velara nodded once. Everything matched expectations. Primitive settlements often lacked significant infrastructure. Then another notification shimmered across the display. Anomaly detected. Her amber eyes narrowed slightly. "Explain." A glowing map expanded over the town. One modest brick building near the center radiated with unusual significance according to the translation matrix. Thousands upon thousands of recorded human works were stored inside. Scientific discoveries, philosophy, medicine, astronomy, history, literature, mathematics, languages, political theory, art, engineering, centuries of accumulated civilization. The translation engine highlighted a single designation. Hall of Wisdom. Velara slowly inhaled. Confirmed translation confidence. 99.8%. Silence settled across the chamber. Her experienced diplomatic instincts immediately recognized the implication. This could not simply be another municipal structure. No advanced civilization would place the foundation of its intellectual heritage in an ordinary building unless the location possessed extraordinary cultural importance. Stranger still, long-range surveillance revealed no perimeter defenses, no energy shields, no armed guards, no biometric checkpoints. People entered carrying coffee cups. Elderly citizens walked through the front doors unchallenged. Children wearing colorful backpacks laughed as they climbed the stone steps. A young mother pushed a stroller inside without even slowing down. Velara stared at the images in disbelief. Magnify entrance activity. The display obeyed. A gray-haired volunteer smiled warmly as she opened the door for a teenage boy balancing an untidy stack of books. An elderly veteran tipped his baseball cap to a little girl who proudly hugged a picture book almost as large as her chest. Nobody bowed. Nobody presented credentials. Nobody requested permission. Security authorization? Velara asked quietly. None detected. Identification screening? None. She watched another family disappear through the entrance, their conversation filled with easy laughter. Her people had spent centuries protecting historical archives beneath layers of quantum encryption and ceremonial guardianship. Entire planets had been dedicated to preserving accumulated wisdom. Yet the humans appeared to trust ordinary citizens with unrestricted access to what the translator insisted was Earth's Hall of Wisdom. Velara felt something unfamiliar stir beneath her disciplined composure. It was not suspicion. It was curiosity so profound that it silenced every assumption she had carried across the stars. She looked toward the quiet brick building framed by maple trees glowing with autumn color, and for the first time since arriving in Earth's orbit, the celebrated ambassador wondered whether humanity's greatest achievement was not the knowledge it possessed, but the astonishing confidence with which it chose to share it. The shuttle settled onto a quiet stretch of grass behind a line of maple trees, its polished hull bending the morning sunlight into soft ribbons that disappeared before reaching the nearby houses. Every precaution had been taken to avoid unnecessary attention. Earth governments preferred first contact missions to remain subtle whenever possible, and Veolyra respected the request. She stepped through the airlock wearing a tailored charcoal travel cloak that concealed the elegant silver patterns woven into her diplomatic uniform. To human eyes she would appear unusual, but not impossible. Her warm pearl skin caught the sunlight with a faint luminous quality, her champagne blonde hair resting neatly across one shoulder, and her calm amber eyes quietly studied every detail around her. The air smelled different from any world she had visited. Fresh-cut grass mixed with roasted coffee drifting from a nearby cafe. Fallen maple leaves rustled gently across the sidewalk. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell marked the half hour, followed almost immediately by cheerful laughter from children crossing a nearby street. Nothing about the town suggested it protected the intellectual heart of an entire civilization. That contradiction fascinated her more with every step. As she approached the brick building, another surprise greeted her. A faded wooden sign stood beside a flower bed filled with late-season marigolds. The painted letters simply read, Maple Creek Public Library. There were no monuments honoring philosophers, no statues celebrating ancient rulers, no ceremonial guards lined the entrance. Instead, someone had placed a small chalkboard beside the front door that announced, Story time begins at 10. Everyone welcome. Veolyra paused for several seconds. Everyone. The translator emphasized the meaning without ambiguity. Every citizen. Every visitor. No distinction of wealth, profession, age, or social standing. Her people reserved their highest archives for carefully selected scholars after decades of evaluation. Here, humanity apparently invited anyone who wished to learn. The front door opened before she reached it. A smiling elderly woman carrying a canvas bag held it open with effortless kindness. Good morning, she said warmly. First time here. Veolyra hesitated only briefly before returning the greeting exactly as she had practiced. Yes, it is my first visit. Well, welcome to Maple Creek. The woman smiled as though welcoming strangers happened every day. You are going to love this place. There were no questions about her accent, no requests for identification, no curiosity regarding where she had come from. Only simple hospitality. Veolyra stepped inside and immediately stopped. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, filling the room with a warm golden glow that reflected across polished wooden shelves stretching farther than she expected. The scent of paper, polished oak, and fresh coffee blended into an atmosphere unlike any archive she had ever experienced. It felt peaceful instead of intimidating, comfortable instead of sacred. A little boy sat cross-legged near a window, carefully sounding out words while his father quietly encouraged him. Two teenage girls whispered excitedly over astronomy books spread across a table. An elderly man wearing denim overalls slowly turned the pages of a thick history volume, while occasionally smiling to himself. Nobody hurried anyone. Nobody competed for knowledge. Behind a broad oak circulation desk stood a man placing returned books onto a rolling cart with calm, practiced movements. He appeared to be in his middle 30s, about 6 feet 1 inch tall, with an athletic build shaped more by honest work than by vanity. His rolled-up blue sleeves revealed forearms dusted with fine traces of paper fibers rather than machinery or weapons. His name tag read simply, Adrian Walker. He glanced up as the entrance bell chimed softly. Their eyes met for only a moment before he smiled with the effortless ease of someone greeting another ordinary visitor. Good morning, he said. Welcome. If you are looking for something specific, I would be happy to help you find it. Veolyra looked at the man standing behind what she believed was Earth's greatest treasury of wisdom, and the only thought that crossed her disciplined, diplomatic mind was astonishingly simple. Surely this quiet librarian could not merely be an employee. He had to be one of humanity's most trusted guardians. Veolyra inclined her head with quiet respect, a gesture reserved within her own civilization for senior custodians of state knowledge. Adrian blinked once, slightly puzzled by the unusually formal greeting, but answered with the same friendly smile. Good morning, he repeated. Is there anything I can help you find today? The question caught her completely off guard. For a brief moment, she wondered if this was some ceremonial test. Surely the guardian of humanity's greatest collection would not ask such a broad question unless he already expected every visitor to pursue wisdom differently. She answered carefully, I wish to understand your civilization. Adrian rested one hand on the wooden counter and laughed softly, not at her, but at the impossible size of the request. Well, that is probably the biggest research project anyone has brought into this library this month. His tone carried warmth instead of pride. He stepped around the circulation desk and motioned toward rows of shelves stretching beneath hanging lamps. You could start almost anywhere. Those words echoed inside Veilira's mind. Almost anywhere. Her translator confirmed the meaning twice, as though even it struggled to accept the implication. There was no prescribed sequence, no authorized curriculum, no required rank. Every path toward understanding remained open. As Adrian walked between the shelves, she followed several steps behind, quietly observing not only him, but everyone around them. A young girl barely 8 years old stood on a small wooden stool reaching for a thick book about planets. Before she could lose her balance, Adrian casually steadied the stool with one hand while handing her the book with the other. Here you go, Emma. Thank you, Mr. Walker. She smiled brightly before hurrying toward a reading table. No forms were signed. No payment changed hands. Veilira glanced toward the child, then back toward Adrian. She is permitted to study astronomy? Adrian looked genuinely confused. Of course. Without certification? She likes space. He shrugged as though that explained everything. To him, it apparently did. They continued walking until they reached a section labeled History. An elderly woman carefully returned several books to a rolling cart. Adrian thanked her for volunteering. Moments later, a high school student arrived carrying another stack of returned novels. Adrian thanked him with exactly the same kindness. Neither age nor status seemed to influence his voice. Veilira quietly noticed every interaction. Respect flowed in every direction instead of only upward. Near the center of the building, a handwritten sign announced that the local chess club would meet Friday evening. Another invited residents to a free class on repairing old family photographs. A bulletin board displayed community events beside poetry readings and children's art. The building functioned as far more than an archive. It seemed to breathe alongside the town itself. Your Hall of Wisdom serves many purposes, Veilira observed thoughtfully. Adrian smiled again. I guess you could say that. People come here to read, study, work, relax, meet friends, learn new skills, or just sit somewhere quiet for a while. Hall of Wisdom. The phrase lingered between them without Adrian realizing he had unknowingly confirmed her translation. They stopped beside a wide window overlooking maple trees whose brilliant orange leaves drifted lazily across the lawn. Sunlight spilled over shelves filled with books whose worn spines suggested decades of careful use. None were locked behind glass. None required armed supervision. Does no one ever attempt to take this knowledge for themselves? Veilira asked softly. Adrian considered the question before answering. Sometimes people forget to bring books back. Sometimes accidents happen. But knowledge is not really something you lose by sharing. He reached for a weathered novel and gently placed it into her hands. In fact, the more people read it, the more valuable it becomes. Veilira lowered her eyes toward the aging hardcover resting in her palms. For the first time since beginning her diplomatic mission, she sensed that every report her civilization had ever written about humanity might have overlooked its most extraordinary achievement. Veilira carried the weathered novel as though it were a ceremonial artifact, her fingertips resting lightly against its worn cover while Adrian continued leading her through the quiet aisles. Every shelf seemed alive with silent conversations waiting patiently for someone to listen. A college student scribbled notes beside a stack of engineering manuals. Across the room, an elderly couple quietly compared gardening books while occasionally smiling at one another over the pages. Near the children's section, colorful laughter drifted through the air as volunteers arranged chairs for the morning reading circle. The building did not resemble the grand archives of her own civilization. It resembled a living heartbeat. Adrian stopped beside a wooden display filled with books recommended by local readers. Small handwritten cards rested beneath each title. One simply read, "This book helped me through a difficult year." Another said, "My grandfather read this to me every summer." Veilira studied the notes with growing fascination. These recommendations were not written by scholars, she asked. Adrian gently shook his head. Just neighbors. She looked at him with genuine confusion. Their opinions influence which knowledge others choose to seek. Sometimes the best recommendation comes from someone who has lived through something similar. He adjusted one of the small cards that had slipped sideways. People trust people. That answer remained with her as they continued walking. Her people trusted institutions. Human beings, it seemed, trusted one another. They reached a quiet reading room where sunlight filtered through tall windows, painting warm rectangles across polished oak tables. A young mother sat beside her son, patiently helping him pronounce unfamiliar words. Neither hurried. Neither appeared embarrassed by the mistakes. Every correct sentence brought another encouraging smile. Veolira. Watch for several moments before speaking. Instruction begins very early. Adrian smiled. Reading opens a lot of doors. Only for those selected? He looked surprised. No. For anyone willing to keep turning the page. The simplicity of the sentence struck her harder than elaborate diplomatic speeches she had heard before galactic councils. She activated the discreet recording device hidden beneath her travel cloak. Every observation suddenly felt historically important. As they approached another shelf, Adrian noticed her studying the classification labels attached to each row of books. Our system makes it easier for people to find what they need, he explained. History stays together. Science stays together. Art stays together. It saves everyone time. Veolira slowly traced one label without touching it. So your civilization organizes knowledge not to restrict it, but to help strangers reach it faster. Adrian chuckled softly. I have never heard anyone describe shelving books quite like that. But yes, I guess that is exactly what we do. A volunteer pushing a cart stopped beside them. Morning, Adrian. I finished sorting the donations. Thank you, Martha. We appreciate it. Happy to help. She continued down the aisle, humming quietly to herself. Veolira watched until the woman disappeared around the corner. She receives compensation? Adrian answered without hesitation. No. She enjoys helping. She contributes her time to preserve knowledge for people she may never meet. That happens a lot around here. Veolira looked around once more. Nothing she had witnessed matched established galactic theories of resource management. Advanced civilizations usually centralized valuable assets behind increasing layers of control. Yet this small town expanded access instead of limiting it. Even more remarkable, ordinary citizens willingly supported that system without apparent obligation. They returned to the circulation desk just as a teenage boy approached, carrying 6 books balanced carefully in both arms. Adrian scanned each one before smiling. Looks like you have enough reading for the weekend. The teenager grinned. Maybe if the weather stays bad. Adrian handed the books back. Enjoy them. No payment. No authorization beyond a simple library card. No suspicion. Just trust. As the young man walked toward the exit, Veolira quietly asked the question that had been growing inside her since she entered the building. Why would your people risk allowing anyone to leave with pieces of your civilization's accumulated wisdom? Adrian leaned comfortably against the oak counter, thinking for only a moment before answering. Because if we keep knowledge locked away, it belongs to a building. When we let people carry it home, it belongs to the future. Veolira stood perfectly still. In that single sentence, the quiet librarian had explained more about humanity than volumes of diplomatic intelligence ever had. That afternoon, the library grew quieter as sunlight drifted slowly across the wooden floor, turning long rows of books into golden corridors that seemed untouched by time. Veolira settled into a reading table near the tall front windows, the weathered novel Adrian had selected resting beside several books about Earth's history, public education, and local government. She had intended to skim them for diplomatic context. Instead, she found herself reading every page with unexpected concentration. Again and again she encountered the same astonishing pattern. Human societies argued, struggled, failed, rebuilt, and improved. Yet throughout centuries they continued creating places where ordinary people could learn without first proving their worth. The concept refused to fit inside any galactic model she had studied. She closed the final book and rested her fingertips lightly against its worn cover. For the first time since arriving on Earth, doubt quietly entered her disciplined mind. Had she mistaken simple kindness for cultural symbolism? Had a pleasant little town somehow persuaded one of the Galactic Assembly's most experienced diplomats to exaggerate an ordinary custom into something extraordinary? She looked toward the children's corner, where a volunteer patiently read stories to 6 fascinated preschoolers. Every few pages, tiny hands shot into the air with eager questions. Every answer was welcomed with laughter instead of impatience. Nobody hurried the children. Nobody measured the value of their curiosity. Lyra silently activated the encrypted communication crystal concealed inside the silver bracelet beneath her sleeve. A faint shimmer became visible only to her eyes. Ambassador Lyra transmitting preliminary cultural assessment, she whispered. Priority level revised from observation to strategic significance. Thousands of miles above Earth, her diplomatic vessel immediately established a secure quantum link. Her chief analyst answered almost at once. We were expecting a report regarding regional governance. Have you located the central archive? Lyra allowed herself one final glance across the peaceful room before replying. Affirmative. However, I am no longer certain the archive itself is the true discovery. A brief silence followed. Please clarify. She hesitated, choosing every word with unusual care. The preservation of knowledge appears fully integrated into civilian life. Access is unrestricted across age groups. Educational resources are maintained voluntarily by the community. Knowledge is not merely stored here. It is practiced. The analyst answered cautiously. That contradicts every previous intelligence report. Lyra lowered her voice. Then previous intelligence was incomplete. Even as she spoke, she understood the weight of those words. If her assessment proved incorrect, years of diplomatic credibility could disappear with a single report. Yet every hour inside the library pushed her further from established doctrine and closer to an uncomfortable possibility. Perhaps the galaxy had misunderstood humanity all along. She ended the transmission without requesting immediate judgment. Some truths demanded patience before they deserved certainty. Across the room, Adrian knelt beside an elderly man struggling to use one of the public computers. Without the slightest trace of frustration, he patiently demonstrated each step until confidence slowly replaced hesitation. When the lesson ended, the older man smiled with visible relief. Thank you, Adrian. My granddaughter will be proud that I finally figured this out. Adrian laughed warmly. She will probably teach you something even newer next week. Nearby, a young boy approached the circulation desk, holding a library book whose cover had partially come loose. He looked down at the floor. I am sorry, he said quietly. I accidentally dropped it. Adrian examined the worn binding before smiling. That just tells me somebody enjoyed reading it. The boy blinked. You are not mad? Adrian gently shook his head. Books are meant to be used. We will fix this one together. Relief spread across the child's face as Adrian carried the book toward a small repair cart, where volunteers carefully restored damaged pages instead of throwing them away. Lyra watched in silence. The humans did not preserve knowledge because books were perfect. They preserved it because people mattered. Adrian soon returned carrying 2 steaming paper cups. I thought you might like some hot apple cider. It is complimentary today. She accepted the warm cup with genuine surprise. You continue sharing without expecting compensation. Adrian looked through the window where bright orange leaves drifted gently across the sidewalk. Some things are worth more when they are given away. Lyra breathed in the scent of cinnamon and fresh apples as the warmth spread through her hands. Her civilization celebrated generosity through elaborate ceremonies performed before thousands. Humanity practiced it quietly on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. She looked once more at the transmission icon still glowing faintly on her bracelet, then reached out and pressed the final authorization. Her report would now travel all the way to the Galactic Council, carrying not certainty, but a conviction she was finally willing to stake her entire diplomatic career upon. Late that afternoon, the quiet rhythm of the library settled into something almost musical. Pages turned with gentle whispers. Computer keyboards clicked in patient bursts. Somewhere beyond the history shelves, a child laughed before quickly remembering to lower his voice, earning an amused smile from everyone nearby instead of a scolding glance. Lyra sat beside the tall windows, watching sunlight slowly fade into the rich amber colors of early evening. She had visited imperial academies carved into mountains and floating archives suspended above oceans of liquid crystal, yet none of them possessed the strange sense of peace surrounding this ordinary building. Her bracelet vibrated once with a silent diplomatic priority signal. She touched the polished metal, accepting the incoming transmission without changing her expression. The image appeared only within her retinal display. High Chancellor Sereth himself filled the projection, his silver ceremonial robes identifying the communication as an official session of the Diplomatic Council. "Ambassador," he began, "your preliminary report has generated considerable discussion. Are you prepared to verify your conclusions?" Veilira answered calmly, "I am. You claim humanity protects its accumulated knowledge by distributing it freely rather than restricting access. Several council members believe your translation matrix may have misunderstood local customs." Veilira looked toward Adrian, who was helping two middle school students locate books about robotics for a weekend science project. He treated their questions with exactly the same patience he had shown every adult visitor throughout the day. "The translation is correct," she replied. "Then provide evidence." Her gaze drifted across the reading room. A retired mechanic quietly explained a map to a young immigrant family using gestures and smiles when words failed them. Near the entrance, a volunteer carefully restocked donated books while humming an old country song beneath her breath. Nobody supervised these acts. Nobody rewarded them. They simply happened because everyone believed they should. "Evidence cannot be summarized by inventory lists," Veilira answered softly. "It exists within behavior." The High Chancellor remained silent, waiting. Human civilization has embedded knowledge into daily relationships. Their libraries do not merely preserve information. They cultivate trust. The council chamber fell unusually quiet. "Trust?" another advisor interrupted. "Please define the strategic value." Veilira watched Adrian hand a picture book to a little girl before kneeling. So they stood at the same eye level. "What do you think you will discover first?" he asked. The child smiled. "Dinosaurs." Adrian laughed. "Excellent choice." Veilira returned her attention to the council. Every child entering this building is quietly taught that learning belongs to them. Every adult reinforces the lesson. The institution survives because the community believes shared knowledge strengthens everyone rather than weakening authority. Another advisor frowned thoughtfully. Such a system would be vulnerable. "Yes," Veilira admitted. "It requires extraordinary confidence in one's own people." She allowed several seconds of silence before continuing. "Perhaps confidence is humanity's greatest technology." No one answered immediately. Even across light years, she sensed uncertainty spreading through the council. Their civilization had measured progress through engineering, military stability, and scientific precision for centuries. Humanity appeared to measure it through something far less tangible. The transmission concluded with a single instruction: "Continue your investigation. We will dispatch an observational delegation to verify your findings." The connection faded. Veilira lowered her hand and quietly exhaled. She had expected skepticism. She had not expected reinforcements. Adrian approached, carrying a small stack of books balanced comfortably against one arm. "We are closing in about an hour," he said. "There is a community book discussion tonight, if you would like to stay. Nothing formal. Just neighbors talking about stories." Veilira looked around the peaceful room one more time. Her civilization would soon send scholars searching for hidden technology, classified archives, or secret governing principles. She already suspected they would find none of those things. Instead, they would discover ordinary people gathering after work simply because they enjoyed sharing ideas with strangers. For the first time in her diplomatic career, Ambassador Veilira found herself hoping that her own people were ready for what they were about to learn. The last visitors drifted toward the front doors as evening settled gently over Maple Creek. Outside, the sky faded from pale blue into deep shades of violet, while the street lamps cast warm circles of light across sidewalks covered with autumn leaves. Inside the library, however, the building did not grow empty. Chairs were quietly arranged into a loose circle near the fireplace. A coffee pot began filling the room with the rich aroma of freshly brewed beans, and neighbors wandered in carrying homemade cookies, notebooks, and well-loved novels tucked beneath their arms. No invitations were checked. No reservations were required. People simply arrived because they belonged. Veilira stood beside one of the tall windows, silently observing another tradition that had never appeared in any diplomatic briefing. Adrian noticed her curiosity and carried 2 folding chairs toward the gathering. "You are welcome to join us," he said. "There is no lecture tonight, just conversation." She looked around the room. "No appointed instructor?" Adrian smiled. "Sometimes everyone teaches a little." Those 5 words lingered in her thoughts as deeply as anything she had heard that day. Within her own civilization, authority determined who spoke and who listened. Here, authority appeared to grow naturally from experience, kindness, and curiosity. An elderly schoolteacher opened the discussion by asking a simple question about the novel everyone had read. A teenage mechanic offered one perspective. A nurse politely disagreed. A farmer connected the story to memories from his childhood. A college student built upon both ideas before asking another question that encouraged everyone else to think more carefully. Nobody competed to sound wiser than the others. Nobody dismissed another opinion because of age, occupation, or education. Instead, every voice seemed to add another thread to a tapestry none of them could have woven alone. Veilira found herself listening more than speaking. Every few minutes, Adrian quietly refilled empty coffee cups or carried fresh cookies toward newcomers without interrupting the discussion. He participated only when someone invited his opinion, and even then he spoke with remarkable humility. The guardian of what she still believed to be humanity's greatest repository of wisdom behaved more like a gracious host than a celebrated scholar. Halfway through the evening, one of the neighbors noticed Veilira sitting quietly at the edge of the circle. "You have been awfully patient listening to us," the woman said with a warm smile. "What do people usually read where you come from?" The room became gently silent. Veilira carefully chose her words. "My home values knowledge very deeply." She paused. "But I have never before seen knowledge treated as a shared conversation instead of a guarded possession." Several people exchanged thoughtful glances. An older gentleman adjusted his glasses before answering. "Well, books matter, but people matter more. If a story stays closed, it changes nobody." Another woman nodded. "That is why we talk about them together." Adrian looked toward Veilira with the same calm expression she had come to recognize throughout the day. "Reading helps us understand ideas. Listening helps us understand each other." Something inside her quietly shifted. Every report she had prepared since beginning her diplomatic career relied upon measurements, statistics, and strategic analysis. Yet none of those tools had prepared her for a room where strangers respectfully exchanged thoughts without seeking advantage over one another. Her bracelet vibrated again with another encrypted message from orbit, but this time she ignored it completely. The conversation unfolding before her deserved her full attention. Outside, unnoticed by everyone in Maple Creek, 3 sleek diplomatic observation vessels slipped silently into Earth's upper atmosphere, carrying the delegation sent to verify her extraordinary claims. Their sensors immediately searched for hidden defense systems, classified research complexes, and advanced technological infrastructure surrounding the library. They found none. Instead, their instruments detected something they had never been programmed to measure. Dozens of ordinary human voices gathered beneath one roof, freely exchanging ideas late into the evening, while a quiet librarian smiled, listened, and made certain everyone had another warm cup of coffee before speaking again. The following morning arrived wrapped in cool mist that drifted gently above Maple Creek before dissolving beneath the first rays of sunlight. The library opened exactly on time, just as it had for countless ordinary mornings before this one. Adrian unlocked the front doors, straightened the welcome mat with the toe of his shoe, and switched on the reading lamps one by one until warm pools of light stretched across polished wooden tables. Nothing about his routine suggested that history was quietly unfolding above the town. High beyond the clouds, 3 diplomatic observation vessels maintained silent orbit. Inside the lead craft, 12 senior scholars watched live transmissions from hidden optical drones no larger than autumn leaves. They had expected encrypted research laboratories, underground archives, or at least a council of distinguished intellectuals directing humanity's educational infrastructure. Instead, they observed a librarian arranging children's picture books before opening hours. One analyst frowned at the display. "Confirm location." "Confirmed," replied the navigation officer. "Coordinates match Ambassador Veilira's report." Another scholar enlarged the image of the entrance. There are still no perimeter defenses. Correct. No biometric verification. None detected. No social ranking protocol. Negative. Confusion quietly spread through the observation chamber. Their models predicted that any civilization preserving centuries of accumulated knowledge would naturally concentrate authority around those entrusted to protect it. Humanity appeared to have ignored every accepted principle. Down below, the morning gradually filled the library with familiar rhythms. An elderly veteran returned 2 mystery novels before chatting with a college student preparing for nursing exams. A father helped his young daughter sign her very first library card, while Adrian patiently explained how borrowing books worked. The little girl carefully wrote her name with determined concentration before holding up the card as though it were a priceless treasure. Everyone around her applauded softly. Veilira noticed the observers recording every moment. She quietly activated a secure transmission. "You are witnessing an initiation ceremony," she said. "Please identify the governing rank of the child," one scholar requested. "None." "Family wealth." "Irrelevant." "Academic standing." Veilira almost smiled. "She has only recently learned to write her own name." Silence answered her. The observers watched Adrian kneel beside the girl. "Congratulations," he said warmly. "Now the whole library belongs to you too." She hugged the card tightly against her chest before running toward the children's shelves with pure excitement. One scholar finally spoke. "Did the librarian just transfer institutional access to an untested juvenile citizen?" "Yes," Veilira answered simply. Another voice interrupted. "Without evaluation?" "Yes." "Without oath?" "Yes." "Without sponsorship?" "Yes." The chamber felt completely silent. Their algorithms struggled to classify what they had just witnessed. Centuries of galactic governance insisted unrestricted access weakened civilization. Yet everything unfolding inside the modest brick building suggested the opposite. During the next several hours, they observed no abuse of trust. Books were borrowed respectfully. Conversations remained thoughtful. Volunteers restocked shelves without supervision. Strangers recommended favorite authors to strangers they had never met before. Every small interaction quietly reinforced the same invisible foundation. Trust generated responsibility. Responsibility strengthened community. Community preserved knowledge. Shortly before noon, Adrian carried a rolling cart toward the donation shelf, where visitors placed books they wished others to enjoy. A worn copy of an old science textbook caught his attention. He smiled, repaired a loose page with careful hands, and returned it to the shelf instead of discarding it. One observer asked softly, "Why preserve outdated information?" Veilira watched Adrian slide the book into place between 2 newer editions. "Because," she answered, remembering countless conversations from the previous day, "humans believe every generation deserves to understand how the next one learned to become wiser." No one challenged her conclusion. For the first time since entering Earth's orbit, the scholars stopped searching for hidden technology. They began studying something far more extraordinary. They began studying the quiet confidence of ordinary people who believed that knowledge became stronger every time it was placed into someone else's hands. 3 months later, the first official delegation from the Galactic Assembly arrived in Maple Creek without ceremonial escorts, military formations, or diplomatic fanfare. At Ambassador Veilira's request, every visitor wore simple civilian clothing and entered the library exactly as any ordinary human would. The recommendation had shocked the council when she first proposed it. She had insisted that if they truly wished to understand humanity, rank had to remain outside the front door. Reluctantly, they agreed. Adrian recognized Veilira the moment she stepped inside, though he blinked with surprise when nearly 24 unfamiliar visitors followed behind her carrying notebooks instead of royal insignias. He smiled with the same quiet warmth he had shown on the very first morning. "Looks like we have a busy day ahead. Welcome back." There was no formal salute, no speech, no recognition that several of the galaxy's most influential leaders had just entered the building. They were greeted exactly like everyone else. Veilira felt something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in her career, she did not want protocol. She wanted authenticity. The delegation spent the day watching children choose books, retirees teach computer classes, volunteers repair donated novels, and neighbors recommend favorite stories to complete strangers. By sunset, none of the scholars had found a hidden vault, a classified archive, or a secret governing council. Instead, they found thousands of ordinary decisions that quietly transformed information into wisdom. Before returning to orbit, High Chancellor Sereth asked Adrian one final question. If another civilization wished to build a place like this, where would you begin? Adrian thought for a moment before answering. Do not start by buying more books. Start by making sure every person who walks through the door feels they belong there. The High Chancellor lowered his head thoughtfully. It was the shortest lesson he had ever received, and perhaps the most valuable. 1 year later, the Galactic Assembly announced its largest educational reform in recorded history. Restricted Imperial archives across 37 member worlds began opening public knowledge centers modeled after the Quiet Library in Maple Creek. Entrance requirements disappeared. Children's reading rooms replaced ceremonial waiting halls. Volunteers stood beside professional scholars. Libraries were no longer described as repositories of information. They became places where communities gathered to learn together. The official policy carried an unexpected name: the Maple Creek Principle. Ambassador Vealira declined every personal honor offered for the discovery. During the council ceremony, she spoke only one sentence. I did not find Earth's Hall of Wisdom. I found something greater. When asked what she meant, she simply smiled. Wisdom was never the building. Wisdom was the people willing to open its doors. Several weeks later, Adrian received a small package with no return address. Inside rested a beautifully crafted library card unlike anything on Earth. It shimmered softly with silver and gold patterns that shifted beneath the light. Across the front, translated into perfect English, were the words, Lifetime Access. Holder recognized as honorary keeper of shared knowledge throughout the Galactic Assembly. Adrian stared at the card for several quiet seconds before chuckling to himself. The next morning, he slipped it into the back pocket of his wallet behind his ordinary Maple Creek Library card and returned to work exactly as always. Autumn arrived once again. Orange leaves drifted gently across the sidewalk while children hurried through the front doors carrying backpacks nearly as large as themselves. Mixed among them walked visitors from distant stars, patiently waiting beside local families for story time to begin. No one stood at the front of the line. No one received special treatment. Through the tall windows, Ambassador Vealira watched Adrian kneel to hand a picture book to a little girl while, outside, sleek diplomatic. Shuttles rested quietly beneath the maple trees without a single guard in sight. The galaxy had crossed light years searching for humanity's greatest monument, only to discover it had never been built from stone, steel, or crystal. It had always been an open door, a borrowed book, and one ordinary librarian who never realized he had taught an entire civilization how to trust.